There's a reason Alex Ferguson chewed his way around football pitches for years. Byron's principles are just as credible in services as they are in physical and consumer products and B2B. It's a bit like Dragon's Den every year. You know, you're fighting for the resources.
Today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing is brought to you by Tracksuit, the always-on brand tracking dashboard for clients and agencies alike. Now, I use Tracksuit all the time, and it helps us make better business decisions. So whether you're an agency, client side, check out Tracksuit. Visit gotracksuit.com to find out more. Thanks to Tracksuit for their partnership of this episode.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. In a couple of minutes, sitting beside me will be Orla Mitchell, who is an amazing marketer, and I got to meet Orla at the Marketing Institute CMO Summit last year. And so many people reached out to me after I interviewed Orla on stage saying how wonderful she was, how amazing she was, and if we could get her as a guest on That's What I Call Marketing. So as I tend to do, I sent her a message and asked her would she do an episode with us, and she has kindly agreed to do that. Orla was appointed a marketing champion, and that's a recognition of her incredible career in marketing. Orla's had roles in Nestlé, Kerry Foods, Mars, Wrigley. She completely rejuvenated the gum category. And then she came back to Ireland, worked in WaterWipes, ultimately becoming CEO of WaterWipes. It's an incredible story, incredible brand. So we're going to touch on all of that today with Orla, as well as Orla's view on how you build effective marketing teams, her leadership principles, some of the core marketing beliefs that she holds true today, and her advice for marketers. You're going to get to meet somebody who has an incredible wealth of expertise in marketing and is willing to share that with all of us today. So I am really looking forward to this episode. Before we get into the episode with Orla, if you are enjoying That's What I Call Marketing, I know I say this on every episode, but it really does help. So appreciate everybody who likes our episodes, shares them, leaves a comment, sends it on to one other person who they think will enjoy it. It is just a great way for us to reach a new audience. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and will do that for us. Really appreciate all of that support. Let's get right into it now with Orla Mitchell. Orla, thank you so much for joining me. As I said in my introduction, I got to meet you at the CMO Summit, and so many people, I don't think I know if I said this to you, so many people come up to me afterwards and sent me messages going, oh my gosh, Orla's amazing. And I was like, I know. Congratulations, first of all, on the Marketing Champion Award.
Thank
and
you.
I know that meant a lot to you, actually, at receiving that, didn't it?
It did, because, I mean, like anything in life, you go through life to kind of achieve your own goals, but you don't necessarily go through life looking for recognition, or at least I didn't. And the fact that I was out of the Irish scene for so long, to be recognised for what you're doing is truly humbling and nice. I thought I was too past it to be winning any of these awards. But as I said to you at the time, the downside of it is, you know, you're getting bloody old when you're getting career awards. But no, it really was fantastic. And it was a fantastic way to kind of reconnect with I would have met years ago. And there's nothing like being recognised by your own, really. Let's be truthful. You know, I've been honoured with other kind of industry awards over the years abroad, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know, lovely feeling in the room and people coming up to you after. It really was. It was wonderful and well deserved. And we're going to hear about kind of, and you won't do this, I know, because you are so humble. But like when we talk through the amazing career you have, it's going to become really clear to people why you got that award. But if we go back, because I'm always fascinated, particularly people who've kind of reached the heights that you've reached in your career. What was to marketing? Like, was it a direct path in, or was it kind of
No, and probably a bit of a detour on the way. I was quite young doing my Leaving Cert. I was 16 doing my Leaving Cert, so 17 starting uni. And I went to UCG to do a BCom, thinking I was going to be an accountant, which would have been very encouraged by my dad, who was in the bank, you can imagine. And I didn't even know what marketing was. And the beauty of a general business degree is you get to touch on all the different disciplines. And by year two, I was going, I don't know, am I cut out for this accountancy thing? marketing.
Right. Yeah.
But we had started doing marketing and I was really intrigued by it. I was intrigued by the psychology of it, what motivates people, and that whole kind of demand creation piece. And then I was still quite young when I graduated from my BCom and I decided to do a master's. I did a master's in business studies in UCD in international marketing, ironically.
Yeah.
And of course, this was crikey, kind of the mid to late 80s. Going on to education made a lot of sense because jobs were few and far between. So I started specialising at the tail end of the education, but it took me a while to crack kind of getting into the roles I wanted. I did a couple of years in consulting attached to the Smurfit graduate scheme. But it took me a while before I took a step back. I took a big drop in salary and that to actually get into FMCG. But that was a conscious choice because I'd worked a little bit in recruitment and I'd observed what marketing looked like in various industries. And I decided, I think, moving consumer goods is for me. So at the time I had a mortgage and I had a car and I was thinking, God, how am I going to pay off all these loans by taking such a decrease in salary? But I started then the traditional brand management route with Nestlé Roundtree at the time. And the minute I started it, I knew this was for me.
What was it when you were in the recruitment piece, when you were looking, that made you think the FMCG roles were interesting to you?
I think it was the pace of it. It's where I saw marketing been most developed at the time. I remember this is the 90s. And they had the budgets, they had the spend, they were doing the sexy advertising, they were doing NPD, kind of innovation, and tended to have a lot more freedom. The multinational country outposts as such, or the markets, tended to have a lot more freedom at that time. So you would get your hands dirty in making creative or whatever, which of course over time has become more centralised and so on. But it was a great way to cut your teeth in all the elements of this marketing mix. And I loved it from day one, actually. I was smitten.
And what brands did you work on?
Initially, when I went in, fruit pastilles, Smarties.
Fruit pastilles.
The kind of the kids' brands, Christmas, Easter, which actually working on seasonal is quite stressful because you don't want to be left 40-foot containers of Easter eggs, a narrow window. But it was quite interesting in the interaction with sales and key accounts. The beauty of growing up in consumer in a smaller market is you get the interface. You're not siloed as much as the big markets. You get the interface with sales. You get in front of customers. So it's a great training ground, great focus on the business model and the financials that you don't necessarily get in the bigger model, the bigger markets. So I always truly relish the fact that I cut my teeth in brand management in smaller markets.
And it is interesting because, as you said there earlier on, it's probably flipped now where if you're working in a smaller market, it's much harder to actually cut your teeth, probably.
Absolutely. And what I say to people, friends, kids who've gone into the marketing field, I say to them, if you're really serious about a CPG or fast-moving consumer good or multinational career now, you're going to have to be prepared to be mobile if you're ambitious. If you really want to go through. There comes a time when the knock will come on the door of having to take on those bigger roles, the bigger markets, the regions, the globe, whatever the case may be. But unfortunately, there are certain markets that are great training grounds in my experience, like Ireland. Australia is another great one. But inevitably, a lot of the successful people had to travel at some stage.
And then moving from Nestlé to...
So I moved from Nestlé to Kerry Foods. For about 2 years. I was headhunted there to run the dairy spreads portfolio at the time, juices and water. They owned Kerry Spring at the time. So that was very interesting because it gave you much more experience in physical new product development, because obviously the market was Irish, the production was obviously here, and of course you were making all your own creative as well, which was interesting, and I enjoyed it. I mean, even dealing with stakeholders like the co-op managers and so on, I tell you, they're a great bunch but a tough bunch, and marketing, kind of trying to manage that short-term versus medium-term investment piece is quite challenging in that kind of environment. So I really enjoyed it, but I was headhunted out of there by Mars, and it was too good an opportunity.
And I want to get on to Mars because it's a huge, amazing story and your path there. And obviously you were doing amazing things in Nestlé to get seen by Kerry, and then Kerry to get seen by Mars. When you reflect back at that, were there things you look at and go, these were the things that you think might have put you in the radar of the likes of the Mars?
I think the beauty about Ireland is it's a relatively small market, but you get noticed by people in the agencies. And
right.
So your biggest advocates become a lot of your suppliers, which in itself is a great lesson for how you turn up as a client, I think, and how you approach that relationship and mutuality, I think, has been something I've felt very strongly about. And, you don't go out to be liked, you go out to be respected, is kind of a mantra I hold, both as a leader of my team, but also as a client. So earning that respect and being respected for your decision-making quality, for giving things a chance, for working with the agency and giving them air cover internally when you're trying to sell something you truly want to do, having that strength of conviction in front of your own internal teams and leadership terms to give them air cover to get stuff through. So I would have always placed a lot of emphasis on supplier relationships over the years and that mutuality, and we're in this together. So that was always a big learning. I think the second one, from a career point of view, we had a great team in Nestlé. Some of my best friends are still from that time, and that time in your kind of, late 20s and so on, and you're out, having a great time. Knowing when to leave or when the time is right for you to progress. And often it comes out of disappointment. My boss at the time, Miriam Hughes, she left to go to the bank, and I put my hand up for the role at the time, but it went to a French guy that was in working on the coffee business. So that disappointment forced me to reappraise where I was going. And that's why I was open to the Kerry opportunity. I did toy with going abroad with Nestlé at that time, didn't really like the opportunities that were coming up. So knowing when was the time, and it's not that I was particularly vertically ambitious, but the job was getting that into that certain sameness. I needed something else to keep the fires burning, so to speak. So knowing when the time is right to leave a company, even if you love working with that company.
That's so interesting. I think, the disappointment. And Miriam Hughes is an amazing person. Anyone in Ireland knows how wonderful she is. But it's a really interesting trigger actually for people. But I guess with that can sometimes come, I don't mean bitterness, but like an anger or something. How did you deal with that? Because I think sometimes if that happens, it doesn't go the way you wanted it to, you can get pissed off. And how do you leave in a dignified way, which you clearly then did? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, there's inevitable disappointment because the old, bit of ego was a little bit kind of crushed, and it was also the easier option. It's easier sometimes to get that ascendancy within something rather than starting all over again in a new job. I went home, I had a good blubber, and then I just moved on. That's what you do, particularly early 30s. But it does refocus you because it's so easy to just trundle along. And focuses you. How many times do we sit down and actually think, what do I really want? What do I want the next few years to kind of look like? And it's not that I ever did what do I want to be, because I never knew titles beyond marketing director in Ireland, truthfully. I had no vision of kind of end game, not at all. So what do I want from my career? What do I want from the role? What do I want to get up for every morning? And when I started feeling that kind of routine or sameness, kind of, you spend too much of your time at work not to enjoy it. So I always sought that more kind of fulfillment, enjoyment piece out of work, because I'd have that little bit of a hedonistic element, and have to be energized, and I have to like what I'm doing,
I love that. But it seems that kind of fire, hunger, pace was always going to be something that you probably looked for.
Absolutely, and I think that's also kind of a phase of life thing. I always have to be able to look back and see I had a hand in that. I saw that going from X to Y, or out and about. Oh, I worked on that brand, and isn't it great to see it go from success to success? So I've always been driven by legacy and a certain amount of tangibility in what I've done, and I think that remains important to me. I think there is the natural shift as you get more senior, that you're going from execution, the do, to the create, plan bit. And that's a nice transition, but only when you're ready for it and only in the right time. So I've learned more from roles that have given me breadth than necessarily going vertically too fast,
Which, again, you can kind of get into that trap of it's nice to have, I'm not saying people don't need to have ambition and goals, but
if you move too fast, you can't look back. What did I achieve? Because let's be truthful. And again, the more senior you go, it takes 6 months to a year to have any real impact. You're living off somebody else's
Yeah,
legacy.
yeah.
And change takes time, etc., etc. So these people, the fly-by-nights that come in for 18 months and they're off to the next thing, I kind of go, really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. Where's the impact? Yeah.
Where's the impact?
You mentioned there as well, I want to move on to Mars in a sec, but you mentioned there dealing with kind of long and short, right? And this is a time before the long and short of it became something that we all know and appreciate.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you were, either was it learning through kind of Nestlé and Kerry Foods, or reading that was making you think about long and short term goals and kind of the brand building and activation side?
Yeah, I think observing the healthy tensions that exist within functions, that natural tension that exists historically between sales and marketing, and then observing the tensions with finance, where that investment in a brands and growth doesn't operate within financial calendars.
No.
It's so observing those tensions and getting to the conversation about how you resolve that, and building the conviction, of course, we have to deliver the number, but actually we also have to think about year 2, year 3. We have to think about aftercare. It's no good just launching this shiny new toy this year and walking away from it next year. So how do you find that balance in an organisation, and engaging in a lot of contracting and debate goes on around that, and that still happens to this day. And that's why I'm very thankful that marketing now is more scientific, is more data-based, because unfortunately it was too opinion-based for too long. We didn't have the data to actually show, it takes 3 to 5 years to build penetration, kind of awareness, etc., etc. So at least now there are more metrics and more measurability, which was sadly missing in the early days. You were really relying on the strength of personality, the strength of conviction, and the ability to drive a good argument forward.
Yeah, it made it so much harder as well, because again, the short term were the sales, and so
hitting the number, hitting the shape,
and it's still the same. But as you say, the evidence and the tracking and the ability to do what we can do now, for example. So then Mars, obviously, a wonderful opportunity, a whole kind of different organisation. How did you navigate that move into kind of a different organisation and different kind of structures? Because you've come from Nestlé. Was Nestlé like Mars in a way? Were there any similarities you were able to kind of pull over?
Yes, the culture was different, family owned versus a public company, but a lot of the basics and the essentials were very similar. And so from that point of view, it wasn't hugely different. It felt, I'm back to kind of a certain familiar ground, but the cultural piece was very different. But there was a lot of mystique around Mars in Ireland. It was always considered a very aspirational company to get into. The challenge at the time was quite an interesting one. I was going in to manage pet care in Ireland, which 60% market share, but wasn't making money, and it was in the midst of a BSE crisis. So it was quite a challenge. So all the supply, I felt more like a supply expert and accountant by the end of the first year, trying to restructure the business model, so to speak. So I probably in the early stages did less marketing than I'd done in my previous roles. It was very much a business model transformation role, but I immediately liked what I saw. I liked the people, I liked the camaraderie, I liked the culture. The culture isn't for everyone, but I really liked that kind of family sense. And they invest from day one. They invest hugely, not only in technical ability, but in leadership as well. Really, and that really kind of appealed to me. And they're very interesting people, very nice people, very interesting people, but they recruit really bright people. So you're constantly on your toes.
Okay, yeah. So you go in there as a marketer, you've done new product development, you've brought things to market, but how was that shift for you in terms of, actually, this is a different type of challenge, like an ad isn't going to fix this.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how did you approach that? If you want to find out more about Tracksuit, go to gotracksuit.com and find out how they can be your affordable, always on brand tracking dashboard.
Yeah, so I often classify marketeers into business marketeers and creative marketeers, and it's not good enough to be one or other.
Yeah.
You kind of, to succeed at the highest levels, you need the right and the left brain working together. So that was the notable shift where I went into actually the importance of business modelling, the financials, how you generate margin to invest, because you can't afford to do all the nice creative and comms investment and innovation development if you don't have the funds to invest. So that kind of shift into the accountability and responsibility for value creation and value generation, that was probably that shift in my career and the strategy bit and so on, which probably is where my greatest enjoyment came then kind of laterally in life. Of course, you still love the creative and whatever, but the more senior you get, the more distance. Yes, you get ultimate decision-making rights and you're involved, of course, at certain stages of approval and briefing and so on, but you're not involved in the execution to the same degree. Yeah. So that notable transition from the creative, the comms-based graph packaging, comms, etc., to actually end-to-end business model and value creation. And that's where I suppose your leadership and your role, your voice at the table becomes most important and most challenged, is that interface with other functions.
I love the way you talk about value creation. I don't know if you know of Thomas Barta. He's written a book of the 12 influencing powers of marketers, but he talks about the value creation zone for marketers to figure out where the business need, the consumer need, and the marketing need all. And he goes, that's where marketers often miss the value creation zone.
Absolutely. So I think the mistake that a lot of marketers and marketing departments made years ago was almost adopting the mindset of we're in service to the business, almost like an internal agency in the business, rather than we're part of the story, we're part of the business, we have a legitimate role to play, we have a legitimate seat at the table. And I think that shift, whilst it was a fair while into my Mars tenure, when as a group of CMOs we made that shift to science-based marketing and the whole relationship with Ehrenberg-Bass and Byron Sharp and so on, that was the most transformational shift, not only in how we approached marketing in Mars, but how we grew as marketing leaders ourselves.
Really?
I mean, I set out to disprove some of the stuff he was saying. I said, this can't be right. I volunteered Food, which was the smaller of the three legacy businesses, to do a lot of the testing, because I was thinking, oh no, some of this stuff doesn't, loyalty has to exist at some level. And actually seeing the data and seeing the patterns and the patterns of growth was truly very technically was the most transformational point in my career, and actually figuring out that it is low-like. There are patterns. Yeah. And actually, it then made me much more confident to put forward the investment case for a lot of stuff that we wanted to do on the brands. And actually, the credibility that grew in the organisation and the relationships that grew were very fundamental, to the degree that when I left Mars, as I was category president of Gum and Mints, my closest colleague was my CFO, because together we were writing a lot of the strategy, we were doing a lot of the modelling, etc. And that meaningful relationship and seeing the credibility of marketing and growth, the growth conversation. And we didn't label, we started talking more champions of growth. We kind of deliberately fuzzied the bridges between sales and marketing, spoke much more of growth as a continuum. But to see the credibility of marketing in its old sense at the table, very much being at the core of the growth conversation, was quite dramatic, actually.
That's not something that will have happened overnight or even...
it was a 3 to 5 year journey, By the time we operationalised it, because it's one thing to take a concept, an academic concept, and the provocation that Byron rightly throws out there, and they said, yeah, we know memories are fragile, we know kind of penetration is king, but how do you operationalise that? Right, yeah. So you have to actually translate some of those theories into key beliefs. Then you have to validate those key beliefs with data, and then you almost have to have an operating model. How do we put this into action? Because otherwise they're just concepts. So how do you actually put those key beliefs into action so you can create almost rules and guidelines and guardrails for markets, be that creative excellence, go-to-market plans, innovation, etc. But it took a while, obviously, to build that kind of operating model, as we called it in Mars, the growth flywheel.
Amazing. I love, there's so much in this. The key beliefs, I love that. Were they key beliefs, like, for the business that were driven by what you were learning from Ehrenberg-Bass?
Absolutely. Yeah. So things like if memories are fragile, within that you kind of go, okay, so what does good creative look like? So what are the principles of good creative and how do we validate that creative is working? So we had our own measurement systems where we could measure advertising effectiveness, and we came up with a star system for our creative, and anything below 3 stars didn't get invested in. And what we found, that then led to a reality that good creative is incredibly difficult to crack. And it doesn't wear out as fast as people. This old adage that, what was it, 3,000 TVRs, you needed new creative.
Out, I know.
So actually...
An ad agency had to have come up with that.
Absolutely. And that was disputed very clearly. And we found we were going back to old creative that was years old because we knew it was effective and it was working much better and the relationship with sales was effective sales was there. So we were often reusing creative that was years old because we knew it was effective. So we could at least say to the markets, then this concept of Germany, English hasn't worked for us and the Americans need to do their own thing and everybody wanted to do their own thing. Then we did a lot of testing around, if you can crack creative excellence, does excellent creative travel? And it typically does. Yeah. Bad creative doesn't travel anywhere. Yeah. And so again, undermining this myth that every market has to do their own thing because we just couldn't afford it. And then that would lead you down another research direction of halo. So do I have to have a piece of advertising or communication for every version of the brand that comes out? No, you don't, because halo actually often, the halo of the brand often comes down on the piece of NPD. Yeah. And knowing when you're using overarching brand advertising versus specific, and there is a role, the closer you get to the point of purchase, there's a role for more rational comms. So all those learnings came from test and learn. And typically if we found patterns transferring over a couple of markets, we had a high confidence in repeatability.
Wow. The test and learn thing is really interesting, and I talked about it before because I love it. I got to work in a team that was about testing and learning with the CMO, but it's easy, I think, to say you're testing, but even within testing you need to have structure.
And guardrails, absolutely, because then it becomes the latest excuse. We're just testing and learning. Let us off. It's a free pass. It's a free pass to do anything I bloody want. Yeah. No, there have to be very specific in a test and learn, and doing it in a way that you learn fast and fail cheaply is the other piece as well. But putting very specific learning objectives and research objectives around it. Otherwise, it's just another excuse. It's another blah.
And it is, again, I've said it before, but one of the things we had was probably one of the hardest questions we had was, what decisions will we make from this? If it works, doesn't work, or is neutral?
What are the action standards? So it's very easy to, because we all get very wedded to our pet projects, let's be honest, and our passion projects. But on things like packaging and comms, what are the action standards? And staying true to those. And not just, it's on the margins of, so maybe. You just have to be very cold about what the true action standards are before you'll start throwing big money behind something.
Yeah, and the other thing we learned was you had to have enough weight behind it to learn.
Yes.
Because the idea of saying, we'll do this test for whatever small amount of money, and you're like, not enough people are going to get exposed.
And over what period of time, etc., etc. Absolutely. You have to be somewhat realistic. You have to somewhat mirror the real kind of, the real world. Yeah.
I want to get on to gum, but maybe just around the kind of this topic, I'd love to just talk about, you touched on it there, I think, with some of maybe the global market, like every market wants something different, and you're operationalizing something based on scientific evidence. You've kind of brought this through the business, but imagine there was still some challenges in markets to kind of say, yes, but we're different. I mean, I spoke to the guys from Kellogg's last year at Cannes, and they brought out the Master brand, brought back Cornelius is back, they've got an amazing track with it. And you talked about there that there's moments where the master brand will do the work and multi-market work will work. How did you navigate that with markets who are saying, yeah, but...
Again, validation and learning together. And, you know, I might have been a little bit simplistic. There are differences in some markets, you know, but it fundamentally typically goes back to the core proposition itself, how people use it, how they engage with it. And if there are any differences that typically arise there, you have to respect those local differences where they exist, but just don't take it as a given that it's just because I'm a different market and I speak a different language that my brain works differently.
I often remember, you know, in sales, for example, you know, B2B sales, people are like, oh, you know, sales is different here. It's all about relationships. I'm like, it's about relationships everywhere. Like, everything's about relationships. So it is, it is. And it's making sure you ask the right questions.
Exactly. And not partnering from a place of conflict and going to prove you wrong. We're in this together. We want ultimately stuff that works. Because if it doesn't work, you know, at the end of the day, you won't get the same investment. So actually, it's very important, particularly as you work in regional or global roles, that you're enabling the market teams to do stuff and learn stuff, that you're not just this thing of edicts from on high doesn't work. It doesn't work. So you have to ultimately work with your lead markets to actually solve the problem together, but coming to the common definition of what the problem is that you're collectively trying to solve is stage one.
And probably your experience and background of actually working in a market where you did get to do a lot of the work at least let you probably have that experience, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say to people, you just can't jump straight into these global roles. You have to cut your teeth somewhere. It's a bit like being a management consultant if you never worked in industry in your life. And there's a bit of a credibility gap there. So that is very important, because what it does do is it hones your bullshit radar in terms of, because people will, of course, they'll try to convince you. You know, as the agency used to say to me, when you used to see Orla tilt her head and the eyebrow go up, you know, the bullshit radar was on duty.
That's brilliant.
Really?
Yeah. That's a fair question. Really? And then you look for the evidence, you know, and if the evidence is supported, it's fine. Gum transformation is a huge part of the journey that you've had. And when you moved, obviously you'd worked on other brands within Mars, and then they came and said, how about gum? Tell me about how that came about and what the challenge was with gum.
Yeah, my first global CMO role was in the food business, which was fantastic. You know, Ben's Original as it is now, there were local brands in markets all over the world. It was really exciting, and what was really great about it was because it was one of the smaller categories, we were left alone.
That's a small category.
From, you know, the bigger categories, so to speak. So it was fun, and we could test and learn. And the president, or the office of the president as they called the top role in Mars at the time, kind of asked through my boss, would I consider going into Wrigley? I was about 2.5-3 years in the global CMO role in food, even though I'd been in food about 6-7 years at that stage. And Mars had obviously bought Wrigley back the financial crisis 2008, and the portfolio was very broad. It needed a lot of tidying up. It was largely a very successful sales and financially driven company, but brand marketing wasn't in the DNA as strongly as it would have been in legacy Mars, so to speak. So I was asked to consider it and move to Chicago. So I took a while, and food, my colleagues in food wanted me to stay in food, and we were on a very exciting journey at the time. But why not? We were still running Wrigley separate at the time because one of the initial investors was Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. And so obviously because of his interest, we had to run it separately, but in time with the plan that ultimately it would come into the main business at some stage. So that piece of it kind of intrigued me, and the brand transformation piece intrigued me. It's a very interesting business, but because it's such an impulse product, you don't go out, I'm going out to buy gum. You're interrupted. You see it at the cash register. You see it in, when you're filling your tank of petrol or whatever. So it was always a proposition very different from chocolate, or indeed, candy as they call it, or fruit-based confectionery. So it was always a heavily invested category, but obviously as it had been acquired, it had to be paid for. It was an expensive acquisition. So kind of getting back to the kernel, making choices within the portfolio. What do we invest in? What do we not invest in? How do we make success more repeatable across markets? How do we make our resources go further? How do we get gum back in the consciousness of consumers? Because consumption is very stable, typically amongst adults, in cars, in the office. But actually, the little stick of gum or whatever it was, getting kids in chewing gum. And there are very strong rational reasons why you should chew sugar-free gum for oral care. Very profound. It can have good appetite suppressant properties. It has good cognitive properties in terms of concentration. There's a reason Alex Ferguson chewed his way around football pitches for years. And you often see sports people before there's a rhythm.
You see some of them playing.
We wouldn't necessarily always recommend that. But also exam. You notice kids doing exams. There's a spike because there's that almost discomforting factor of the chew, and that process of mastication, which goes back to ancient Greek times, actually has very solid properties. But recruiting kids in was quite a challenge, and that was about proposition, it's about pricing, it's about getting into their consciousness. So it was a slow build, but a very interesting one. It's a tough enough category. It's a tough enough category.
Because not, you say, it's not, as you say, like chocolate,
it's not sexy.
It's a treat. You know what I mean? Or there's kind of indulgence. Yeah, exactly. There's no. How did you unlock then kind of what it was that was going to? Did you go back into the
Went
DNA?
back into. I'm a fantastic in all the categories I've worked in and all the brands I have led globally. I'm a huge fan of archetypal branding, storytelling, archaeological digs, going back into what was the inspiration, the fundamental inspiration behind a brand. Why does this brand exist? What value does it bring? And what was the nugget that made it kind of famous way back when? I'm a great believer in that, because often the formula is there. If we understand the initial inspiration and success, we're well on our way to actually rediscovering that, because it doesn't shift dramatically over time.
Which is interesting. 'Cause when you got into kind of then the DNA of the category, did you focus on a specific brand first? What was your approach then, kind of going back, discovery, what made it famous?
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of step one. And you're absolutely right, Conor. The category has its own story and narrative and its own meaning. So then the choice becomes, as market leader, do I want to take on the clothes of the category and own all the category entry points, or do I want to be distinctive with a different meaning in that category? So things like pet care and baby care, they're all nurturing categories. You're protecting, you're providing for something that's very innocent, be that a puppy, be that a child or whatever. So do I want to take on those clothes, or do I want to show up differently in that space? Take a brand like Dolmio I worked on. I mean, ultimately food is about togetherness and getting the family mutually around a table, around a meal everybody loves slopping about with, which is spaghetti bolognese. But actually, you could have gone down, so the narrative of the category is around collective enjoyment and sharing. But actually, the campaign that I was involved in for years with the puppets, it was a gesture, it was it was showing up quite distinctively in that category in a fun, quirky way that was still highly relevant to the meaning and narrative and needs of the category, but did it in a very unique and distinctive way. And that's the win-win. If you can find a distinctive voice but still own your category kind of meaning and cues and entry points, that's where the magic happens.
They were those puppets. I mean, that was amazing.
It was an Australian campaign. It was an ex-colleague of mine. That went on. Bruce McCall. He was the overarching CMO at McLean, but he spent a lot of time in food, and he started that campaign. It was fantastically rich, and all the creative was shot in Australia. And I got a couple of nice trips to Australia on the back of that.
I knew this was Australia. I'm there.
But it was very effective in its time.
When you look to, because we want to get on as well, because the WaterWipes story is again another really interesting one. But when you look back Maybe you completely transformed Gum.
Yeah, and the extra campaign in the US was a big bet. But that was again going back to a core truth about sharing a stick of gum. The States gladly still have, they have much more formats than we have here in Europe. They still have the sticks and pellets and whatever. And each, I'm a stick gal. I don't particularly love pellets, I have to say. But that extra, that insight around kind of sharing and moments in and its role in everyday life was actually very transformative, because at that stage Mondelez had the number one brand in the States, but thankfully through that campaign over 3 to 5 year period, Extra got back into number one position in the US.
And you've talked a couple of times about the 3 to 5 year period. I mean, that can be hard, again, it's long the short, but like staying the course. You obviously had huge capital at this point. You've had successes to point to, so I guess there was
again helped by the tools, the fact that we had tools to measure creative effectiveness and conversion, and you could see the growth metrics around penetration and so on shifting. Be very clear about what the action standards are for a given year, what contract you're making, deliver those, and then that builds belief and trust for year 2, year 3.
Were there any moments in that Gum transformation where people were like, we're not there, or had you set the conditions for success?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough category, and it's also, remember, it wasn't a legacy category for Mars. Mars' first love was chocolate, for reasons you can obviously understand. And when you're fighting for a portfolio, when you have 3 categories within a big business, particularly when we did the integration, you've big factories and capital bills and NPD that needs capital and so on. It's a bit like Dragon's Den every year. You're fighting for the resources. So it's about business case, it's about business return, it's around internal rate of return. It's not just all about, this creative works, off you go. It's actually about, this is the return you're going to get on project A over here versus project B in Gum. And it's down to, let's be honest, cold business decision making, based on metrics. But it's a very complementary category to, when you look at a snacking portfolio, the barriers to entry are very high because gum is expensive to manufacture, and it played a very definitive and solid role. But knowing what its role was is very important, that you get that alignment strategically. The role of gum is whatever the role is, whatever the role, it's very important to have that kind of portfolio approach and trade-offs.
So,
and same happens in brand portfolios as well. Exactly. You have to know the trade-offs with your brand. You can't support everything.
Exactly. Being able to, as a marketer, kind of, I guess, step out and see it from the business perspective versus your piece, because that can make you can miss the point. I can't believe how fast this time has gone, but I do want to quickly talk WaterWipes then. So you made the decision to, I guess, move. Was it a decision to move back home?
No. Everything in life, my boss that had brought me into Mars retired, and obviously his successor was appointed and decided he wanted a structure which was different. So instead of having 3 global category presidents, he wanted one overarching chief growth officer and more junior people at the category. So I effectively was out of a role. I mean, I would have put my hand up for the chief growth officer and obviously didn't get it. So we came, and unfortunately there was nothing senior enough left. And to be fair, they're a great company, would have tried. So it was all very mutual, and they looked after me very well. I mean, in hindsight, of course, I was enjoying it, and I was a bit devastated, and I was devastated to be leaving my team. But actually, in hindsight, on a personal level, COVID hit in 2020. So this was this was 2019, and COVID hit in 2020. I would have been stuck in the US for 2 years. At a personal level, it would have been quite a test. I wouldn't have been able to come home.
Oh, wow. That's amazing, isn't it? And so the WaterWipes opportunity...
Well, originally I said I was going to go to portfolio at that stage. I was going to go straight to boards, and then I was approached with the WaterWipes opportunity, initially as chief brand officer, with a hint of maybe something bigger in time. I was always very clear that that I didn't want to go into another corporate role indefinitely. And at the time, it was very much a scaling challenge. And which is about making choices. What are the markets we're going to double down on? Where are we focusing? We can't service 53 markets. So it was really tidying that up and co-creating a strategy that everybody understood and delivering against that, which is what has happened in the last 3 to 5 years.
It's fascinating because, you know, you've obviously have all that kind of global experience and then you're getting something ready for that. Like, it's very different, maybe side of the similar coin.
Yeah, though the models I have found, again, back to that whole kind of flywheel for growth and laws of growth stage, it's category agnostic. It works in insurance and banking. Those principles, Byron's principles, are just as credible in services as they are in physical and consumer products and B2B. I kind of had an instinct for what works and what doesn't work in different markets, and my knowledge of markets kind of helped as well. So the age-old mistake that all businesses make is they try to do too much. So you just have to be choiceful. You have to be, what do I prioritise? What top 5 markets? What's the role of each market? You're the market that creates the profit. You're the market that gets it to invest. And this is the reality. This is the hard reality of running kind of global businesses and at a microcosm running brand portfolios. No, we can't afford to support. And if we do, you're an alternative growth model. You're a slower build. You're not mainstream media investment. So recognising how we're going to do things and the role of each piece of the puzzle is a fundamental conversation that a lot of businesses don't have enough of. And then staying true to those choices, not changing your mind 6 months later. Of course, if stuff isn't working, being able to course correct with agility is very important. But staying true to the fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve, it's not rocket science.
You say that. You make it sound easy. But no, I completely understand that. And even within a brand, at a product level, do you know what I mean? The same decision. Nobody has the money. It was really interesting earlier on, you said, you know, Mars, we didn't have the money. You know, everyone looks at everybody else because, they've more money, or we don't have the money. Nobody has as much as they want.
Every business is resource constrained at some level,
just
from people
degrees.
To investment to capital to whatever. Everybody's resource constrained.
The decisions are the hardest thing to make.
They are, and saying no to things. It's much easier to say yes than no. And staying consistent when you see the early signs of positivity or growth, doubling down and staying true to it and not getting bored with stuff.
Orla, there's so much more we could and probably should talk about we've touched on so much. I mean, just your approach to how you think about marketing, and through this conversation, I'll go back and have a look. We haven't used the word marketing all that much, I don't think, because you've talked really about marketers' role as
co-pilots, absolutely.
Growth co-pilots. I love that phrase. I talked about that at the CMO Summit. I think it's because it changes then the dynamic you have with the organisation.
And your accountability and role in the organisation as well. It's not just this thing of functions and specialism are great to a point, but I mean, the days of functional silos and throwing things over a wall are gone. You know, just how business is done. I mean, all the, everything is very nuanced, and it's a continuum really nowadays, rather than I'm sitting in this box and you're sitting in this box.
Listen, thank you so much for taking the time.
Not
honestly, it was such a pleasure to meet you last year at the CMO Summit, and thank you so much for coming in and
You're welcome.
doing this for me today.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
Went quicker than I initially dreaded.
Orla, thanks a mil. Cheers.
Thanks, Conor.
Today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing is brought to you by Tracksuit, the always-on brand tracking dashboard for clients and agencies alike. Now, I use Tracksuit all the time, and it helps us make better business decisions. So whether you're an agency, client side, check out Tracksuit. Visit gotracksuit.com to find out more. Thanks to Tracksuit for their partnership of this episode.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
I hope you enjoyed that episode with Orla. What an incredible guest. And do you know what? After the episode finished recording, Orla actually stayed back for another hour to talk to the marketing team here in 123 and Intact Insurance. So incredibly generous of Orla to spend that time with us as a marketing team as well. So we got the hour with Orla. You have an hour with Orla as well. Please do share it with your marketing teams, and they will get real value out of listening to not just Orla's story, but her perspective, her views on the world of marketing, what helped her through her career, what are the things that helped her drive growth and completely rejuvenate categories, but also work in a category where price sensitivity is really real and really important, and she was able to charge a premium price for the product of water wipes. That is it for this episode. Again, if you have enjoyed it, you can like, rate, review, share. Please do. If you would like to get involved with That's What I Call Marketing, we're always looking for amazing brands. We reach marketers all across the globe: Ireland, UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, even into non-English speaking markets. We have an incredible following. Almost 45,000 people follow and subscribe to That's What I Call Marketing. So if you want to reach marketers, please do get in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Conor Byrne, or visit that'swhatIcallmarketing.com. That's it for this episode. From me, your host, Conor Byrne. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. Take